7th Triennial Section 1201 Rulemaking. This is Class 11, which is a request to circumvent TPMs protecting computer programs that capture avionics data. My name is Reagan Smith. I'm Deputy General Counsel of the Copyright Office, and I think we on this side will introduce ourselves, and then the panelists will introduce themselves.
I'm Stacy Chinu, Senior Attorney Advisor at NTIA, National Telecommunications and Information Consortium.
John Reddick, Copyright Office.
Julie Solomon, Assistant General Counsel of the Copyright Office.
Anna Chavez, Assistant General Counsel of the Copyright Office.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Bruce Jackson, and with Air Informatics, I filed the request for an exemption for avionics or information off of the current generation of aircraft. Any aircraft, but the concerns are the current generation being digital, software intensive, data intensive, and connected. Now, I can start with a bit of background of who I am and why I come to this point, if you wish.
I think that may be helpful briefly now. In general, we've received a
Can you speak up a little bit?
Here, I'll put the microphone closer. So we've reviewed the written comments carefully, and I think the point of view of this hearing for us is to probe where we're trying to understand better the evidentiary basis for the requested exemption, as well as connect it to the legal standards that the Copyright Office and NTIA are looking at in determining whether to recommend that an exemption be granted. So I think if you wanted to briefly summarize what brings you here, that would be a helpful starting point, and then we'll sort of drill down on questions that are probably geared at what is happening in the Copyright Act and what we're supposed to look at in determining whether the exemption might be appropriate to recommend.
So, shall I just wait for your questions, or
Well, why don't you briefly summarize what you're seeking to do?
could you speak up?
Can you briefly summarize what why this exemption is necessary in your view?
The current generation of aircraft, the aircraft that are such as the A350, the Boeing 787, the Gulfstream G650, these generation of larger business jets and commercial airliners are digital, as I was saying. They are basically computer controlled at this point. And the avionics systems on board generate large quantities of data on a normal operational basis. That information is used for a variety of purposes. And those purposes can be for flight operations, quality assurance, how well the airplane is being flown, how well the pilot is flying the aircraft, and is he doing so in a safe manner, in a way into which the airline has their airline standards. There's information regarding to maintenance and other activities on the aircraft, and there is today with these aircraft, there are security concerns. The FAA has evaluated these new generation of aircraft and determined special conditions, meaning that the design of the airplane, taking into account information technology, the certification rules to which have been reviewed, do not account for the digital nature of these aircraft and the fact that there can be digital threats, cybersecurity threats to the aircraft itself. The FAA has identified, they have a database, and the last time I looked, about 24 different aircraft that have been identified as having security concerns. And in that, they have also published regulations and actions to which the airlines and the operators, because it could be a private operator for that matter, who has a business jet, that they must comply with and maintain to keep the security of the airplane and the airworthiness of the aircraft itself. The aircraft is controlled and basically broken down into three domains. The passenger domain, which has little concerns of actions in it. There is a information domain to which is controlled, and then a control domain, which is the actual operation of the aircraft. And each of those has the control domain and the information domain has a concern and a potential risk. And so part of the regulation is to develop security protocols for maintaining this aircraft. And part of that protocol is to review the data. Now, the FAA and the airlines and the operators have had a ever-increasing improved safety record because of the activities they have done to oversee and provide quality assurance for the maintenance, support, and operation of the aircraft. And so, with the digital nature of the airplane itself, there's an increased interest in the control of that information, even though there is a requirement now for the airline to review that data. So we're in a bit of an interesting area at this point.
So is your company looking to make an aftermarket data analytic product, or what is your interest in circumventing a TPM on an aircraft?
Air Informatics in my company is really looking at the information, the communications, the analytics, the connectivity, and the cybersecurity for the airplane. So it's, in essence, how do we collect the information, because they're vastly wireless, but there's also wired means to collect the data, what they call sneakernet, running out to the airplane with a USB drive. But it's about the connectivity, the analytics, understanding what's going on the airplane, and the cybersecurity.
So are you already collecting this data, or is there data that you would like to collect that is being hampered by an access control?
It's having a hard time hearing. I've probably been around too many airplanes, but
Are you already collecting this data, or is the collection of the data that you're seeking to get hampered by an access control?
it is both, really, in the sense of the work that I've done and the work that we've done have dealt with airplane health management for Gulfstream, cybersecurity for a box and penetration testing for the airline or the operator, or for the manufacturer of the component box that would go on the airplane, and for assessments of the security of the airline's infrastructure to support the airplane and the development of the airplane network security program. The drive for request of the exemption has been really the situations have occurred where a manufacturer has chosen to encrypt data and not provide access to it, or to act to prohibit the access to that data, and prevent companies from doing the analysis. Now, we do the analysis, the contract to an operator or an owner, because we are in contract to those parties.
So is the aircraft operator or owner allowed access to that data and then they pass it on to you, or are they having a hard time getting that data also?
They have a combination of all the above, in the sense of we can do the analysis because it can be complex and it can be novel and interesting in the sense that they're not well versed in the space and they've gone to third parties.
But can an aircraft operator or owner get the data that you're seeking to get? Right, you're trying to circumvent something in order to get
Right.
data, is what I understand in essence what your request is. And then trying to figure out whether or not the aircraft owner already has access to it.
Well, the aircraft owner, we work in conjunction with the owner or the operator. And I say owner or operator because you could have leased aircraft,
Right.
and you can have owned aircraft. And there's a fine line difference between that and a difference in interest. But we fundamentally work for the operator because they are the ones that have the requirement to maintain a safe and secure aircraft. So the FAA regulations fall on the operator of the aircraft itself. And so we work for them typically in this case. We could work in the sense that a leasing company may say, I want that data, because we have to have that data when the lease gets turned over in order to meet requirements of the FAA. We want to make sure we have it up front instead of trying to collect it afterwards. And they have concerns of failures of the airline and inability to get that data that would have a significant impact on them in the end.
Does, is it the manufacturer of the airplane that controls access, who could give you access to the data, or is it the manufacturer of subcomponents within the airplane? How does that work?
You buy the airplane, you buy all the systems in it. You pay for the gas, you hire the flight crew, you fly the airplane. The onus of the requirement to maintain it in a safe condition is on the operator.
So who has access to the data that you're trying to access? Like, if that's protected by an access control, like, who has the password to get to that data? Is it the manufacturer of the component, or?
No, it's a responsibility of the airline to collect that data. The standard or how that data might be formatted is by an industry-based standard. In the sense, there is a committee or a group called ARINC, we originally called Aeronautical Radio, that was formed by the airlines themselves going back to the 20s to create standards so they can have interchangeability of components or parts or the like. And they've defined a format standard to which the manufacturers build to. But the software itself may be developed by the box owner, but the information we're collecting relates directly to how that aircraft is being operated, how it's being flown, how it's being maintained in itself.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, in order to get to the information, I mean, is it possible to go to the manufacturer of the box or the airplane and seek permission or get a license to access that data?
Well, they are trying to exert the position, some, that you can't deal with that data unless you get our permission. But the airlines believe, and historically, this information has been, the airlines consider their airline information, and it could be anything from any type of information.
Do the airlines already have access to this data that you're
They have
seeking access
yes,
to?
because they're responsible for, example, there is a wireless access point on the top of the airplane. In what's called the electronics bay, or in a compartment of the airplane itself, which houses all the computers, there are file servers. The airplane information is collected in that file server, in essence, a hard drive. Then on landing, that data is streamed out directly from the airline to a corresponding access point at an airport or at their hangar to go directly into their possession. And so
Sorry,
it
to go into
is,
whose possession, to go, when you say the data is going to the hangar or wherever, and it goes into their possession, when you say their possession, who do you mean specifically?
I missed the last.
When you're saying their possession, whose possession are you referring to?
The data from the airplane after a flight goes, they have the responsibility and they have set up systems, so it goes back to the airline. And so it can go directly to their, when they land and pull into the hangar or to the terminal, and it goes directly back to their servers.
When you say the airline, do you mean the owner or the operator?
The owner operator, yes, really, that's the best way to do it.
So
And that's what I'm saying.
I guess I had thought that you were looking at the airlines or the operator as a potential client, but it sounds now like you may be trying to access data that is proprietary to the airline that they do not wish to share.
We do not do anything without the airline's request and on contract. So we're not listening in and going back to them because that data belongs to the airlines.
So now I'm confused why the exemption is necessary. If the airline already has the data, can't they just give it to you?
Again, I apologize.
can the airline just give you the data if they already have the data and it's their data?
I'm not sure I understand.
So let me maybe restate the question slightly different. So in what process are you interrupting that data flow? So you said that the airplane pulls up, it then is transported or transmitted to a server at the hangar or at the,
Right.
and at one point, are you interrupting that? Are you getting it after it's already stored by the operator, or are you getting it in between that? Is that when you're getting?
It can be either, in the sense that we have and can set up an access point and manage that access point. And so the data comes from the airplane, and we can do things where we manage the delivery. We oversee the delivery from the airplane. We can capture the information as a service that then delivers it to the airline.
So
That doesn't mean we do an analysis of it, we just do a connectivity and delivery. We can do, on contract, the analysis of the data.
So let me probe a little bit more on that. In order to do so, you're saying that you have permission of the operator to interrupt that flow.
Yes.
And so it's curious to me why they wouldn't give you that after it already was loaded onto their server rather than interrupting that. Is there some reason why you have to interrupt that data flow in order to get the data? Is it because the format of the data is the problem?
No, it's in the sense of, it's not their business model to do wireless and information management of that side, and they may find that it is not cost effective as their own systems. And so it's a matter of economics. It's not that they can't. They may not be good at it, or they may not find it economically, they may find it economically better that we do it than they do it. And so it's a matter of just a business model, I think, is what
I'm
how
not
I'm
sure
answering it.
that is his question. I think he's saying, maybe Mr. Cheney, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're getting the data at one part in the process, are you just seeking to circumvent to make it more convenient to get it at a different part of the process, or is there something else going on?
It's a matter of their business choice. We can deliver the data, capture it, and make sure, manage that collection process and delivering it to their servers to look at. Or we could deliver it to their servers for somebody else to look at. But it's their data, if I'm understanding what you're saying, it's their data. And frankly, you may have an operator that is small, 2 airplanes, and that's just not something they're good at or want to be good at. And so they're going to say, help us get that data. And that's part of the business, to do the connectivity piece and the management piece. And part of it would be a report to say, so much was delivered as of this date, but I don't know what's in the ones and zeros. The business model could also say, do the analysis of the data. It's the analysis of the data because the data that we manage may be encrypted and we can't see it, and that's fine. But the data, in a case that is encrypted, the airlines may, or the owner, the operator, may then say, we would like you to review and analyze that data as well. But if it's encrypted, that's a means of protection that we have to then overcome.
Can they give you, the airlines, permission to decrypt the data in that example?
Yes, if they have it, and yes, if they're given that decryption code. That has not always been the case. There have been cases where the original plan was a standard VPN from the 2 ends of the endpoint, from the delivery to the receipt of the data on the ground or in a hangar, and then they chose to encrypt it. And so we can be the VPN endpoint, but they chose to encrypt it as well.
Who's encrypting it in that?
Well,
process?
it would be the manufacturer of the airplane.
And so by what you're suggesting is, I think, in this process, let's see if we're teasing this out and we understand. I think that's what we're trying to get at here, right? Your client is primarily the operator of the airline.
Yes.
Who's ever operating the airplane. This data is being encrypted or coming from the manufacturer of the airplane or the manufacturer of the part or whatever, and they're the one that's imposing the encryption on it, and you want to decrypt it at some point in that process. Is that what we're getting at?
Yes, if it's on contract with the owner operator. There have been cases that didn't happen with us, but a manufacturer of the airplane, the airline, the operator, owner operator, has data. They have collected it. And now they want to give it to a third-party company to do analysis of it because they didn't have the expertise or the staff, or economically they thought it would be better to contract it out. Well,
This is the encrypted data.
it could be encrypted or it could be decrypted.
Well, if it's
In case
decrypted,
it
you don't
could be
need to be
encrypted.
here, right? If it's decrypted, 1201 is not hindering your ability, I think, to analyze that data. So we're more focused on when there's encrypted data.
Encrypted data. And then the OEM, the manufacturer, steps in the middle and says, no, you can't give that to them. We're not giving you the code. And that became a business challenge. It became a regulatory challenge. In this particular case, the company that was doing the analysis was purchased by another large, well-known company. And the OEM said, well, we withdraw if you're going to go with that company to do, now that they're owned by this others, we don't have a problem with that. And so it got very complicated in that sense.
Have
So
you received threats of legal action based on section 1201?
I'm not sure
So in that example, it sounded like the situation was resolved, so I'm wondering about, again, the need for this exemption. Has your company or your clients received refusals to decrypt the data or cease and desist letters invoking section 1201 or something suggesting that this prohibition on circumvention is an obstacle to what you want to do?
I really apologize, I'm not hearing you properly. I mean,
Has anyone told you that you cannot decrypt the data, that you've been presented with a cease and desist letter or
we have never received a cease and desist letter.
have you asked for permission and been told no?
We have been told we would not be given permission.
So let me just clarify some things you've been saying. It sounds like the aircraft owner or operator can get the encrypted data off of the airplane without a problem, but the problem is decrypting it.
Correct. And the actual access to the data. And they have even gone to the point where even the data was not encrypted, or that they've refused, they basically have threatened that you have to pay a license to review that data.
Do you know of any circumstances where someone has asked for a license to the encrypted data and the license has been refused?
They has not been requested, we have not been told that you can get a license for this data.
I thought you said just a few minutes ago that someone could be offered a license to the encrypted data. So that's what I'm asking about.
With another company, that is how it's happened. And the situation that I described of the OEM stepping in between and saying you can't have access to that data without a license to it was not with my company, but it was with a company that I was working with, and we couldn't go forward even in discussions.
But that implies you can get a license to the encrypted data.
They,
So I'm asking for
Yeah.
any examples where a license to the data has been requested, but then has been refused.
in this particular case, we were managing a certain part of that chain, a certain part, and I was managing the development of the security protocols. In that, we were pointing out and determining what type of analysis would be required and how to manage the requirement to analyze the data. The particular owner-operator had a long-standing agreement with that owner-operator that data would be managed. The OEM stepped in and says, you can't allow them that data.
You said earlier, though, it is the aircraft operator's data, so how can the OEM prevent them from sharing their own data?
That is a question that is a question I cannot directly answer, because I am of the belief the owner-operator was of the belief that they owned that data. Because, again, it was a box that they purchased, came with the airplane. The format was commonly known and was not proprietary. And the manufacturer of the airplane was saying you can't do that. In the end, they removed their objection when the third-party company that was doing the analysis was acquired by a major partner.
Do the owner-operators, which involves their data, do they support your request for an exemption, do you know?
For them to do the analysis?
For you, this exemption, there was only 2 comments, maybe 3 comments filed, and we didn't receive any from the airlines. Do you know whether your clients support your request for this exemption?
Again, I'm not exactly sure I'm hearing you properly.
Well, you seem to be seeking an exemption to circumvent and access control to get at data owned by the airlines. Do
Yes.
the airlines support your request, do you know?
Yes, I believe they would in this case. If
Have
they,
you asked them?
we have engaged in that with airlines, and it's an ongoing discussion, and it's something we've had with other airlines globally. That, of course, doesn't impact this decision because it's not a U.S. airline.
But the airlines may be in a position to give you this data.
Yes and no. If the data has already been encrypted, has been decrypted, and they have the codes, yes, they can. It is their data. It is their right to manage it any way they wish. That is their position. That's our position. There have been cases where they have not been given that information to decrypt that data.
Is this data, it comes through in bulk form, would you call it unstructured data?
It is in bulk form, it's raw files, it's uninterpreted. It requires a degree of interpretation, and it comes as not ones and zeros, but as some form of, how can I put it, formatted data, but it's not in a easily to understand fashion. It's a combination of codes and text characters with certain meanings. The meaning of this data, and it could be altitude, pressure, temperature, speed, how the airplane's flown, control surface inputs, things like this, that the industry has defined definitions of this and formats of it saying this is the order of the data and you can take it from this XYZ to an intelligent text string of speed, altitude, pressure.
So the format is dictated by industry standards or FAA regulations, is that correct?
The document, the development of that standard is done by committees, by the operators themselves that are composed of the operator staff. It was originally done, or the company called ARINC. ARINC in its structure has been recently sold. There's a history to that. ARINC was formed in the 20s by the airlines themselves. Everybody had a piece of the company, a percentage of the company. And they still have committees that define standards for the development of the box, the format of data in this particular case. Now, as it turns out, during the beginning of the recession, the airlines wanted to get rid of the ownership of the company and they sold it to a private equity firm, Carlyle. Carlyle then sold it to Rockwell Collins. Rockwell Collins then sold off the standards group to SAE, which is Society of Automotive Engineers. And they are maintaining this in the same way they had before.
They're maintaining a standard?
The standards and developing new standards.
How do the operators comply with the FAA regulations currently if there's encrypted data they are having trouble getting access to?
I'm not, again,
Well, can I ask, because the FAA regulations mandate that the airlines have to analyze this data and collect it, if a manufacturer of a box or a component refuses access to the data, isn't there some way that you can point to these regulations? Is there an enforcement mechanism where the manufacturer has to comply to allow the airline to comply with the FAA regulations?
that action has not been taken. The FAA does not seem to be interested in taking that action. They don't care how you get the data, as long as the analysis, I should say the analysis is done, as long as it's done. And so they don't care if you pay a license or you do it yourself, they just say it has to be done.
Are you saying that in some instances that it's not being done today? Is that why your service is being offered?
I know very specifically of cases where it's not being done.
And it's done because they can't interpret the data because it's encrypted and it can't be read except by some third-party provider like yourself?
It's a host of reasons. Manpower, knowledge, experience. I don't think there's one definitive reason that they are not doing it.
So it's not necessarily primarily that there's encryption on the data, that is not the reason that they're not providing.
That is one of the reasons.
It is one of.
It is certainly one of the reasons. I mean, there have been cases where it goes back, they have not managed to create a consistent connection to the airplane, and so they were unable to get it for periods of time. It could be weeks or months. And though the regulations say that you need to do this on a periodic basis, it was not done. And there are cases where the encryption, they didn't do it because they didn't have the skill, they didn't have the encryption codes, and it's not being reported. I know on some manufacturers, one manufacturer and airplanes, they are not distributing the encryption codes. And to comply with the regulations, you have to go to their designated company. And that's just the way they did it.
What happens if an airline doesn't comply with these regulations? Does the FAA impose a fine on the airline? Are they grounded? What happens?
If there is an audit of the regulation, there can be some form of penalty which is typically a fine. The fines vary, depends on the severity of the issues, but audits are not that common.
And do you cite the exact regulation you're referring to in your comment, or do you have that up?
I can give you those regulations.
Okay.
I can give you, those I can give you copies of, because they're public. There's AC, and I can rattle some of them off right now.
Sure, that would be helpful.
AC 119-1, OBspec D 301, FAA 8900.168. Oh, wait a minute, I have that bit of a list, and I can give you that digitally. AC 119, which I mentioned, FAA 8900.1, Volume 3, Chapter 61, which is the Aircraft Network Security Program. I mentioned OBspec D301, which is N 8900.189, and that's Aircraft Network Security as well. N 8900.358, dealing with aircraft electronics systems security special conditions. And those are the primary ones that are in place right now.
Given that there are so many current regulations, why would it not be more appropriate for the FAA to address the issue of manufacturers not providing decrypted data?
Well, it may be, and I can't say whether it is or is not. They are not getting themselves, they tend not to get involved in something relating to this.
Have there been direct efforts, or have you tried to affect the FAA regulations or any other regulations to require manufacturers to
I've had
provide decrypted?
I've had conversations with those individuals to understand why it's not being done and what their position is, and the answer has been, it's not our position to do that.
If you were able to get the encrypted code, how would you decrypt it?
Well, the encryption code is like anything else. It's like any other encrypted data. You just apply the code and it will.
But assuming you don't have the code,
Well,
let's assume you have the encrypted data but not the encrypted code. What happens?
right, if I don't have the decryption key.
Right.
You know, you could go through a variety of algorithms to try to find a way to go to find that code and go do it. I mean, that's a standard process and procedures, but it's not one that I choose to do. That, in my opinion, gets a little bit dicey, even if we had the permission to do it. But you can technically do that. It depends on the strength of the code and how they've chosen to encrypt it, the algorithms they've used.
How strong is the code?
It varies. It's up to whoever's setting up the encryption algorithm.
What's typical? 16-bit, 32-bit?
It's typically, I hate to say this, I've seen some pretty weak encryption codes. They are not current to NIST standards or recommendations. Historically, they just have not. One manufacturer only, I don't know if it was late last year or beginning of this year, changed digital certificates from SHA-1 to SHA-2, and that's been recommended to be changed 10 years ago by NIST, but they just hadn't. These are not necessarily the most, well, I've seen various levels of encryption, from very weak, they could probably be decoded in a short period of time.
Is there any concern that if you were to decrypt the code, it would somehow become corrupted?
Well, you have standard methods to make sure the data is not corrupted. That's built into the information. There is means to which the data can be authenticated, validated, and can, with CRC and other forms of digital means, to make sure that data, the integrity of the data remains. That's key to what has been done, and that's a fundamental principle in developing the data stream and the delivery of data. So that's not necessarily related to, decrypting it or not. And you would be able to tell whether it was, corrupted in one manner or another. That's critical in a couple ways. One, you're dealing with very specific information with a output format that is within expected norms. Corrupted data from going from 600 knots, 600 miles per hour, to 601 miles per hour is, you would detect that from a CRC, but the type of errors you would have is you're suddenly doing 60,000 miles an hour, which is obvious it's an error. But there are means to digitally determine that the authenticity, the non-repudiation, all these components are in it to make sure that what is sent is what is received. And that's independent of encryption.
So you have said in your writing that the circumvention would be conducted in a controlled setting, such as an office or data management environment, and that the data would not be exposed in any real-time flight operations setting. Can you explain a little bit more how that would work?
Well, you're dealing with standard methods, tools, and process procedures to guarantee that you're not losing any data loss. You're not going to have any data loss or data.
But I think my question is, you're not taking the data while the plane is in the air, right? I mean, what does that mean? The data would not be exposed in any real-time flight operations setting. That's your statement. So I'm just trying to understand what is behind that.
You're saying that, how do I prevent the data being lost and being.
No, I think she's talking more about safety concerns. So like you say, you're going to be analyzing the data in a controlled environment, not when the plane is in the air. And I think she just wanted some more information about that statement that you made in your rec submission.
This is just being done in industry standard practice and services and environments. That's fundamental with everything you do. And the data does not directly impact any airworthiness or provide any flight risks. The data is to see that the airplane is being flown properly, maintained properly. Probably the most real-time concerns is the cybersecurity side, to make sure that you can look at the data at some close interval to determine no one has touched the airplane with an intentional means to harm or to corrupt or in any way to affect the airworthiness of the airplane or the flight.
Once you have access to the data, particularly in the cyber security area, which you're just referencing, does that give you control of any kind over any of the software in the plane or information about being able to access the software in other parts of the airplane?
The data that is received, and again, is in all cases advisory, in the sense that it does not, the data is always advisory, in the sense that you can look at it, determine how well the airplane is being flown, whether certain maintenance actions have actually occurred. Maintenance actions have been done properly. In the cybersecurity side, it would be to make sure that nobody has touched the airplane, that you can see no malicious act that would impact the airplane itself.
I think part of the question here is that misuse of this data in some way. Does this data give you the sort of information that would, were it be published on the internet, for example, that it would allow some cybersecurity incidents, or allows you that sort of access that you would be able to have some malicious access to the aircraft or be able to do it?
Access to the aircraft, I'm trying to think the best way to answer this. The data itself should not or would not impact the operation of the aircraft itself if it was revealed to someone. It might reveal someone's, flying capabilities. It might reveal a maintenance fault. It does not impact some software being changed or reloaded, or counterfeit software to be delivered to the airplane.
So I think if we can restate what you're saying, just to make the point, is that this data is given to you at some point by the airline.
Yes,
After the plane is on the ground,
yes,
all of this data is given to you to analyze what the plane has just done,
yes,
and then to give it back to the airline to say, this is what's wrong. It's not to access anything while the plane is in the air or to affect its next flight. See, that might be one of the issues is, does that data give you an opportunity, or whomever might get access to this data, some information that allows them to do something with the plane as it takes off for the next flight?
In any of this, you may look at a case where somebody is flying erratically, and it might be flagged to the airline that something dramatically is wrong with how this airplane is being flown. There could be something that could determine they made a maintenance error and the anti-lock brakes, are miswired. That requires a very quick analysis, which is not being done now. Most of this is trend-related information. The most important real-time or near real-time analysis would be the security of the airplane itself. To look at the data and to see that there was no unauthorized access to the airplane. There is equivalent of a firewall, and that no one attempted to go through the firewall. Or there's an access point, and you can see there was no unauthorized repeated attempts to log into the airplane from at some airport that was unauthorized. That's the type of thing that the FAA is most concerned with, that would raise a red flag that says, hey, we have to look at something, because all of a sudden at XYZ airport, someone tried to connect into an access point on the top of the airplane 100 times. And the airplane didn't respond, or the airplane responded. Did someone maliciously try to upload something into the airplane, try to connect through something? Those are the types of things that are most important in a real-time basis. That I think is what you're looking at. The answer, the type of thing you're looking for with that question.
Well, actually, I was looking for the sensitivity of the data itself that you are getting. Can that data be misused?
Yeah, and the misuse of the data. Okay. No, not. It should not be in that sense.
So my question is then, why is the manufacturer encrypting the data?
There's economic value to data. There is a belief, and I have been told by a vice president in charge of one aircraft program that is their intent to own everything on that, all the data off of that airplane, because it impacted their business opportunities for global services. So that they could offer certain maintenance operations and they wanted to be solely responsible for that. That was specifically told to me by a vice president of an aircraft program at a well-known manufacturer. You know, so it's similar to what I had said with the airline being told by the manufacturer that no, you're not authorized to give the data captured from your airplane on how you're operating it or how the pilots are flying the airplane to a third-party company to do the analysis.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jackson, very much. I don't think we have any more questions for you, so that will wrap up